They say the past is gone. But sometimes, it comes roaring back on a quiet road in the middle of the night. This is the story of James Byrd Jr. He was born on May 2, 1949, in Beaumont, Texas, the third of 8 children. He grew up in Jasper, a small town nestled deep in East Texas. His family was close. Church was the center of their lives, and James sang in the choir. He loved music, had a quick sense of humor, and was known to light up a room with his smile. He graduated from Jasper Row High School in 1967, one of the last segregated classes before desegregation fully took hold. Though he didn't attend college, James had big dreams. He married, had children, and worked odd jobs to support his family. Life wasn't always easy. He struggled with alcohol at times. He made mistakes. But he was deeply loved by those around him. On the night of June 7, 1998, James had visited his parents and was walking home alone. He didn't own a car and often walked. That night, he accepted a ride from 3 white men in a pickup truck, John King, Lawrence Brewer, and Sean Berry. They weren't just ordinary men. King and Brewer were avowed white supremacists who had spent time in prison. They were covered in racist tattoos, lightning bolts, swastikas, and Confederate flags. And they had something sinister planned. Instead of taking James home, they drove to a remote area down a logging road on the edge of town. There, they beat him viciously. They taunted him, punched him, kicked him, and sprayed his face with black paint. Then they did something unimaginable. They chained James by the ankles to the back of their pickup truck. And they drove. For nearly 3 miles, they dragged his body along a country road. His skin was torn away. His limbs were shattered. He remained alive for much of the ordeal, trying to shield his head with his arms. But eventually, his body gave out. One of his arms was torn from his body. His head and upper torso were severed when it struck a culvert on the roadside. When they realized he was dead, they dumped the remains in front of an African American church and drove off. His body was discovered the next morning. At first, authorities didn't understand what they were looking at. The scene was gruesome, like something out of another century. But it didn't take long to piece together what had happened. James Byrd Jr. had been lynched, dragged to death in a brutal hate crime in the summer of 1998. News of the murder exploded across the country. The town of Jasper was thrust into the national spotlight. People were horrified. Many believed crimes like this had died out decades ago. But this was a reminder: hate had never left. It had simply gone quiet. James's funeral drew national attention. Civil rights leaders, politicians, and activists came together in mourning. His family, in their grief, called for justice, but also for peace. They didn't want riots. They didn't want hate to answer hate. They wanted to ensure this would never happen again. The 3 men were arrested and charged with capital murder. Sean Berry, who was driving the truck, received life in prison. Lawrence Brewer and John King, the 2 white supremacists who had orchestrated the killing, were sentenced to death. Brewer was executed in 2011. King followed in 2019. Neither man expressed remorse for what they had done. In the wake of James's death, his family worked with lawmakers and civil rights organizations to push for stronger hate crime legislation. Alongside the family of Matthew Shepard, a gay college student who was beaten and left to die in Wyoming that same year, they became voices for change. In 2009, their efforts succeeded. President Barack Obama signed into law the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. It expanded federal hate crime laws to include those targeted for their race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or disability. James Byrd Jr. didn't die in vain. His name became a rallying cry. His story forced America to confront the hate still simmering beneath its surface. It reminded the world that racism wasn't a relic, it was a present, living danger. But more than that, James was a man. A father. A brother. A friend. Someone who laughed, who struggled, who dreamed. James Byrd Jr. didn't set out to be a symbol. He was just trying to get home. But on that night, hate found him. And on that road in Jasper, he became a symbol of how far hate will go, and how far justice must reach to stop it. His story reminds us of the cost of silence. Of what happens when we look away. And of the long shadow racism still casts across America. Yet his legacy is not just in the pain, but in the change. In the law that bears his name. In the lives educated by his story. In the courage of a family that turned grief into action. Today, his story continues to be told, not just in textbooks or news reports, but in the quiet moments when a country reflects on what it must never allow again. James Byrd Jr. deserved to live. And we must never forget how he died.